There are quiet nights when you lie down and suddenly realize the world around you is far older and wider than anything we usually think about during the rush of a busy day. Towering mountains, endless oceans, and the layers of stone beneath our feet have been recording stories for billions of years. And yet, the chapter we humans know, the kingdoms, inventions, and names we write in history books, is only a sliver, a thin bookmark in an immense volume. We like to believe that we are the first carriers of intelligence, the first civilization to build, to remember, to dream. But have you ever wondered if that assumption is too small? What if, long before us, something else had already reached that threshold, risen for a time, and then disappeared without leaving a clear trace? If Earth is both a patient storyteller and a forgetful one, then the opening chapters may have been torn away, drowned beneath ancient seas, swallowed by volcanoes, or recycled back into the shifting crust. We have no certainty, but the silence in Earth's memory is wide enough for the question to linger. And it is in that silence that imagination has room to breathe. If this thought feels both unsettling and strangely familiar, then stay with me as we explore it together. You're watching Arcane Skies. Feel free to like, subscribe if you wish, and leave a comment about where you are and when in your day or night we're meeting right now. When we try to picture the earth before us, the mind often wanders to silence, an empty wilderness, a blank canvas waiting for human footsteps. Yet that image is misleading. Long before our species emerged, the planet was anything but silent. It was alive with movements, sounds, and rhythms that belong to worlds we will never fully know. To begin this journey, we have to set aside the comfort of thinking that everything important began with us. Instead, we must learn to look at the Earth as an ancient stage, constantly changing, constantly reusing itself, and perhaps, just perhaps, hosting stories that no longer leave obvious traces. Imagine standing on the shore of a continent that no longer exists. The coastline stretches in unfamiliar shapes. The sky carries clouds heavy with a climate not our own, and the air smells of plants that have no living relatives. The Earth's crust is restless. Plates drift, collide, and separate, shaping mountains that rise and wear away over spans too long for us to grasp. If you were to return millions of years later, the same land might be gone, buried beneath ocean water, or folded into a mountain chain. Everything we know feels stable only because our lives are so brief. From the perspective of geological time, permanence is an illusion. This raises an unsettling thought. If civilizations had ever appeared before us, civilizations not of human design, what chance would their traces have against such relentless change? Consider what happens to our own cities when they're abandoned. Within a decade, weeds split the pavement. Within centuries, buildings collapse into ruins. Within a few thousand years, little remains beyond scattered stone, and even that eventually merges back into the earth. Multiply that decay across millions of years, and even the most durable monuments become dust, melted or crushed, their fragments scattered far from where they were first placed. Earth, in this sense, is not a careful archivist. It does not keep records for the sake of posterity. It is a forgetful host, constantly rewriting its surface. Rivers carve valleys and then vanish. Volcanoes bury landscapes and then erode into soil. Ice sheets grind down entire regions, leaving nothing but bare rock. What survives into deep time are not complete stories but fragments, fossils pressed into stone by chance, chemical signatures trapped in layers of sediment, hints of climates that once dominated. For every detail preserved, countless others are lost forever. And yet, even with this imperfect record, we know that intelligence is not something limited to us. Look at the present. Crows drop stones into water to raise its level, solving puzzles that show abstract reasoning. Dolphins recognize themselves in mirrors, a sign of self-awareness once thought uniquely human. Octopuses unscrew jars and wield tools with flexible arms, learning behaviors that can differ from one individual to another. If such sparks of cognition exist all around us today, is it really impossible to imagine that once, long ago, those sparks flared into something greater, something like civilization? Of course, imagination alone is not enough. Science reminds us to ask, what evidence would we expect? Here, a curious hypothesis comes into view, the Silurian hypothesis. Proposed by serious scientists, its name borrowed from fiction, it asks whether an industrial civilization, human or not, would leave detectable traces millions of years later. We know our own industry has already etched marks into ice cores, sediments, and even into the thin radioactive layer from nuclear testing. These signals might persist for millions of years, long after skyscrapers have crumbled and satellites have fallen. They are subtle, but they are real. Could similar signatures exist in deeper layers of rock, formed long before we arrived? It is a humbling thought. Perhaps a geologist has already brushed past such a clue without recognizing it, labeling it as natural variation, never suspecting an artificial cause. Not because of negligence, but because the idea lies so far outside the expected. We look for natural explanations first, and rightly so, but the result is that the most extraordinary possibility may remain hidden in plain sight, waiting for a shift in perspective. To grasp how easily traces vanish, we only have to imagine time itself as a tide, washing over everything. An entire city of stone may stand proud for centuries, but give it 10 million years, and the odds are against it leaving any recognizable mark. Layers of rock fold and buckle, burying evidence under unimaginable pressure. Seas rise, drowning coasts where civilizations might once have thrived. Even the continents themselves wander, dragging ruins across the globe until they're torn apart and recycled. If there were others before us, their story might already lie, dissolved in the planet's memory. And yet that possibility is not depressing, it is liberating. It reminds us that the story of intelligence on Earth might not be singular. We may not be the pinnacle, but one of many experiments, one branch on a tree that has grown in tangled, unpredictable directions. Just as species have risen and vanished countless times, so too might minds capable of planning, building, and dreaming. To imagine this is not to indulge in fantasy, but to embrace humility. The earth is old, older than our imagination can stretch. To assume that we alone mark its first flowering of civilization may simply be another form of human arrogance. So let us walk slowly into this idea, without rushing to conclusions. We don't need proof in hand to explore its shape. We only need curiosity, the willingness to picture landscapes alive, with possibilities we never learned about in school. Maybe intelligence wore feathers or scales. Maybe it lived in colonies in the treetops or beneath the waves. Maybe it left nothing we would recognize, yet shaped its world in ways that mattered deeply to them. All of it is speculation. Yes, but speculation guided by what we know about time, geology, and the resilience of life. That is where our journey begins, not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with imagination balanced against science. The Earth has been many worlds, each layered over the last. Some pages of its story remain open to us, while others have been erased. What lies in those missing pages? That is the mystery worth following. When you stretch your thoughts across the billions of years as our planet has lived, you begin to realize how brief our own story is. Every building we have ever raised, every law ever written, every name carved into stone, all of it belongs to the last flicker of geological time, the faintest scratch on Earth's long surface. Before us, vast chapters unfolded with their own dramas, their own rises and falls, continents split and collided, oceans spread and vanished, climates warmed and froze. Life did not wait for us. It filled every corner it could reach, shaping forms so strange and varied that even fossils cannot capture the full imagination of it. We are used to measuring time by years, decades, or centuries, but the Earth's memory works in spans of millions. Imagine a coastline today, sandy beaches, dunes shifting with the wind, birds nesting, waves erasing footprints within hours. Now speed the film forward. In 10,000 years, that shoreline might be drowned by rising seas or pushed outward by accumulating sediment. In 1,000,000 years, the entire region may be unrecognizable, lifted as cliffs or ground flat by glaciers. To search for traces of civilizations in such a landscape is like searching for writing on a slate that has been wiped clean again and again. And yet, the possibility lingers that beneath those layers, something remains. Life has never been static. It has reinvented itself after every catastrophe, after every mass extinction. When asteroids struck, when volcanoes darkened the skies, when seas retreated or spread across the continents, new lineages adapted, filling spaces left empty. Each recovery gave rise to forms that had not existed before, many of them experimenting with intelligence in subtle ways. For us, intelligence is easy to define. We picture language, tools, cities, but the roots of it are much older and much broader. They appear wherever life has the chance to learn, to adapt, to anticipate. Consider the octopus, a creature without bones, living in the sea, yet capable of solving puzzles, remembering mazes, and even showing curiosity beyond immediate survival. Its intelligence evolved along a completely separate path from ours. Its nervous system is spread not only in its head, but throughout its arms, a distributed form of thinking. If such abilities can arise in a lineage so distant from us, what other forms of mind might have blossomed in ages past? The fossil record tells us little about behaviour. A skull can show the size of a brain cavity, but it cannot reveal whether that brain dreamed, planned, or told stories. A set of tracks pressed into ancient mud can suggest a herd moving together, but it cannot tell us whether they cooperated or competed, whether they comforted one another or stood apart. The deeper we look into time, the more silent these possibilities become. And yet, silence is not proof of absence. It is simply a reminder of how much the Earth has chosen not to preserve. Think of the oldest human structures we know: stone circles, carved temples, settlements traced in ruins. They are 12,000 years old at most, a blink compared to the hundreds of millions of years life has existed on land. If we rely only on monuments of stone to define civilization, then of course we appear first and singular. But if we expand the idea, if we allow civilization to mean any sustained culture of intelligence, any organised way of living that alters the environment and passes knowledge from one generation to the next, then the horizon of possibility grows wider. Imagine a species that never worked with stone but with wood, fibres, shells, or living plants. Imagine they built in ways that left no mark once time consumed their materials. Imagine their culture was recorded not on tablets or in carvings, but in oral traditions, in patterns of song or colour that vanished with them. By our measures, nothing would remain. By theirs, it might have been enough. What would survive 10 million years of erosion, uplift and burial? Perhaps nothing we would recognise at a glance. Perhaps only subtle signs, an unusual layer of minerals in rock, a shift in the chemistry of ancient soils, a distribution of fossils that suggests landscapes were once shaped by more than wind and water. Scientists call this challenge the problem of detection. Even if a pre-human civilization had existed, recognizing it would be difficult without context. A carved stone out of place might be dismissed as a natural fracture. A mineral deposit with odd composition could be explained as volcanic. The line between natural and artificial blurs the further back we look, because nature itself produces patterns that mimic design. Straight lines, circles, and layers are not always the work of minds. Sometimes they are the patient work of geology. And so we are left in the space between certainty and wonder. It is a place of humility, where we admit that our instruments, our theories, and our expectations may not be enough to reveal the full story. But it is also a place of possibility, where the imagination can ask, what if? What if long before us, there were creatures that saw the world not only as it was, but as it could be? What if they changed rivers, built shelters, or passed traditions? What if they dreamed? Dreaming, after all, is not limited to humans. Dogs twitch in their sleep, chasing prey in their minds. Birds move their eyes beneath closed lids, as if replaying flights. Dreaming is a sign that a brain is weaving memories into new patterns. And once a mind can imagine what does not yet exist, invention is possible. A stick is no longer just a branch, it becomes a tool. A sound is no longer just a cry, it becomes a symbol. These are the first steps towards civilization, and they can arise in many forms of life, given time. In this light, the Earth becomes not just a home, but a stage that may have hosted many experiments in intelligence. Some might have ended quickly, erased by catastrophe. Others might have lingered, leaving faint echoes in the rocks beneath us. Whether they reached cities and monuments or stopped short at smaller scales is less important than the recognition that we do not know. The silence of deep time is vast, and within it, there is room for more than one story of civilization. That is where we stand now, at the threshold of wonder and doubt, looking backward into a darkness so deep that even light cannot pierce it fully. Our questions may never find definitive answers, but perhaps the asking itself is enough. Perhaps what matters is that we remember our story may not be the only one, and that the earth, patient and forgetful, may still keep secrets hidden in its deepest layers. To understand how fragile the traces of any civilization might be, we have to sit with the reality of deep time. The surface we walk on feels solid, but it is only the latest version of a planet constantly remaking itself. Every mountain we see is temporary, every valley provisional. The Earth's crust behaves less like a permanent stage and more like a restless skin, folding and shifting as if it cannot keep still. If we imagine a civilization buried in this restlessness, we immediately confront the problem. Time is not kind to memory. Think of a city we know today. Imagine it abandoned tomorrow. For a few decades, concrete and glass hold their shape. Then rains infiltrate, roots push through, metal rusts and bends. In a few centuries, the skyline is gone, replaced by green hills and scattered stone. Within a few thousand years, even the outlines of streets may be swallowed. Now stretch that process not for centuries, but for millions of years. What remains? Perhaps nothing more than a chemical trace in the soil, a thin line in a cliff face that no one notices. Earth is relentless in its erasures. Oceans rise to drown coasts. Glaciers advance and scrape the land bare. Volcanoes bury entire regions beneath rivers of lava. Even without catastrophe, the slow pressure of plate tectonics folds continents into mountains, melts rock, and drags the seafloor back into the mantle. Every place we know today has been other places before. Some surfaces are only a few thousand years old, others hundreds of millions, but none are immune to change. For the traces of a civilization to last, they would need extraordinary luck. Buried quickly, sealed away, and never disturbed by the grinding machinery of the planet. We know this because life itself has been erased again and again. Whole species vanish from the record, not because they never existed, but because conditions for preservation are so rare. Fossils form only under special circumstances: rapid burial, lack of oxygen, protection from scavengers. Most creatures that ever lived left nothing behind but whispers in the evolutionary tree. Even the species we do know are represented by fragments. A tooth here, a bone there, a footprint in hardened mud. Out of this sparse evidence, paleontologists reconstruct worlds, but they are worlds with missing chapters. If ordinary life can vanish so thoroughly, how much more easily could the traces of intelligence disappear? And yet the Earth does remember in peculiar ways. A forest may turn to stone if buried in ash and mineral-rich water. Insects may be trapped in amber, preserved with such clarity that their delicate wings still shimmer millions of years later. Footprints may harden into rock, carrying the impression of a single step across unimaginable spans of time. These are accidents of geology, rare alignments of circumstance. For a civilization to leave a similar mark, it would need not only to exist, but to be fortunate in how its remains were sealed. Without that, its memory would dissolve as completely as breath on glass. This is where the imagination begins to press against the edges of science. Could we already have walked past such traces without realizing it? Could a streak of metal in a cliff be misread as natural, when in truth it was once part of something shaped? Could a layer of unusual minerals in the soil be dismissed as volcanic when it was the byproduct of industry? These questions sound improbable, but they highlight how much interpretation depends on expectation. We see what we are trained to see. If no one is looking for civilizations millions of years old, how likely are we to recognize their fingerprints? Even in our own time, we have left marks subtle and enduring. Nuclear testing has scattered isotopes across the globe, embedding a radioactive signature in ice and sediment that will last far longer than our cities. Carbon emissions have altered the chemical makeup of the atmosphere in ways detectable for millennia. Plastics and synthetic compounds spread into soils and oceans, leaving behind traces that will persist long after buildings fall. These are the geological equivalents of footprints, small, dispersed but stubborn. If another species were to study the Earth millions of years from now, they might not find skyscrapers, but they would find our chemical shadow. So we are left with a paradox. The grand monuments we think define us, bridges, towers, roads, may vanish, while the invisible consequences of our industry linger. If the same principle applies to a civilization before us, then perhaps we should not expect statues or temples. Instead, we should expect faint shifts in chemistry, unusual concentrations of metals, subtle scars in the landscape that defy simple explanation. Detecting such signs is difficult because nature itself is a master of creating anomalies. But difficulty is not the same as impossibility. It only means we have to ask questions differently, to remain open to what seems unlikely. All of this brings us to a humbling realization. If Earth has hosted civilization before, its evidence might be hidden, not in ruins we can touch, but in patterns we can barely measure. We might never be able to prove it. The record of life on this planet is fragmentary, and the older we look, the thinner it becomes. But absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is only the mark of how much time has passed, how much has been erased. Standing in front of a cliff tracing layers of sediment with your eyes, you are looking at a book with torn pages, ink smudged, paragraphs missing. You can piece together the outlines of stories, but never the whole. Somewhere in those missing lines could be the traces of something astonishing. Maybe a civilization that built in wood and cloth, leaving no stone to endure. Maybe one that lived beneath the oceans, shaping coral and shell. Maybe one that never needed monuments at all, but still told stories to itself in languages now lost to silence. The question is not whether we can find certainty, but whether we can accept the scale of our ignorance. The Earth is vast in both space and time. Our own story may not be its first experiment with intelligence, nor its last. To carry that thought is to carry humility, a recognition that the universe is not obligated to make us unique. Perhaps intelligence has bloomed before and been erased. Perhaps it will bloom again long after we are gone. What matters is that in the great silence of time, there is room enough for the possibility. When scientists try to stretch their gaze beyond the evidence we already hold, they sometimes turn to what are called thought experiments, questions designed not to prove, but to expand what we are willing to consider. One of these is known as the Silurian hypothesis. Its name, borrowed from a piece of science fiction, might sound whimsical at first, yet the idea behind it is serious. It asks, if an industrial civilization had risen millions of years before humans, how would we recognize its traces in the present? And perhaps more unsettling, could we already be walking past those traces without realizing what they mean? The starting point for the hypothesis is simple. Civilizations change the world around them. Ours has done so in ways both obvious and subtle. We clear forests, divert rivers, build roads that span continents. But we also alter things we do not always see. The carbon released into the atmosphere leaves a chemical signature, a distinct ratio of isotopes that differs from natural patterns. Nuclear testing left a thin but global layer of radioactive material that has settled into ice cores and sediments. Plastics, metals, and synthetic compounds are spreading into soils and oceans, becoming part of geological layers that will endure long after skyscrapers have turned to dust. These subtle marks may last for millions of years, long after everything familiar about our civilization is gone. And if we know our own industry leaves such a signature, then logic suggests that any earlier civilization, human or otherwise, would leave a similar mark. Not identical, of course, because their technologies might have been different, but still detectable as an anomaly against the background of natural processes. This is the heart of the Silurian hypothesis, not to claim that such a civilization existed, but to ask what we would need to look for if it had. The challenge lies in separating artificial signals from natural ones. Volcanoes can flood the air with carbon and sulfur, mimicking the chemical shifts of industry. Asteroid impacts can spread rare elements across the globe in a sudden burst. Shifts in ocean currents can change sediments in ways that resemble pollution. The Earth produces strangeness on its own, and most anomalies turn out to be natural once examined closely. But every now and then, evidence resists easy explanation, leaving us with a puzzle. And even if the puzzle eventually proves natural, it trains our minds to remain open to possibilities we might otherwise ignore. Think of how archaeologists work with human history. They do not rely on a single artifact, but on context. A shard of pottery means little alone, but when found with others, with tools, with the remains of structures, it becomes a story. In the same way, to detect an ancient civilization in the geological record would require not one anomaly, but many, forming a pattern. Layers of unusual metals, coupled with changes in atmosphere, coupled with shifts in biodiversity. These together might suggest deliberate action. But to reach such a conclusion would demand extraordinary caution, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And yet simply asking the question changes the way we see the world. If we allow ourselves to wonder whether traces of intelligence could be buried in the rock record, we begin to look at anomalies differently. What looks like a streak of metal may not only be a natural deposit. What looks like a sudden warming event might have causes beyond volcanoes. The Earth's deep memory becomes not just a record of climate and catastrophe, but perhaps also of minds that rose and fell before us. Consider, for instance, the boundary layers that mark mass extinctions. At the end of the Cretaceous, a thin layer rich in iridium tells us of the asteroid that ended the age of the dinosaurs. Could other layers hold clues not of impacts but of industry? We do not know. Our tools may not yet be precise enough, or our interpretations may not yet be broad enough. But the possibility lingers like a faint shadow at the edge of vision. The Silurian hypothesis does not insist on hidden histories. It insists on humility. It reminds us that the absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. It tells us that the Earth is both archive and censor, preserving some details while erasing others. And it asks us to imagine that, if intelligence is a natural product of evolution, it might not have emerged only once. We are one example, but not necessarily the only one that ever was or ever will be. And what would such a civilization have looked like? That is where science gives way to imagination. Perhaps it was small in scale, spread across landscapes, without leaving vast cities, yet still organized, still cultural. Perhaps it built in materials that decay quickly, never meant to withstand the grind of millions of years. Perhaps it thrived in environments where fossilization is rare. Dense forests, shifting coasts, or open oceans. If so, the silence we hear in the geological record may not be a denial of their existence, but simply a failure of preservation. Even our own species would leave only fragments if time erased us. Imagine an alien geologist arriving 50 million years from now. They would not find New York or Tokyo. They would not see the ruins of highways or the bones of airplanes. They would find layers in the soil, subtle changes in chemistry, and maybe a few stubborn relics in caves or deep sediments. From those traces alone, would they be able to reconstruct us? Would they even guess that our species told stories, built art, and dreamed of the stars? Or would they dismiss the signals as natural quirks? The question does not make us smaller, it makes the story bigger. It invites us to step outside the narrow window of our own history and picture Earth as a canvas far older and broader than our presence on it. We may be the first or we may not. We may be unique or we may be part of a repeating pattern. Either way, the thought widens our sense of time and place, reminding us that the ground beneath us is both familiar and alien, a palimpsest of forgotten worlds. From here, the journey deepens. If there could have been civilizations before us, what forms of life might have built them? We look at the age of reptiles, at the reign of dinosaurs, at the seas that held creatures, both alien and intelligent in their own ways. If intelligence can appear among crows and octopuses today, then perhaps it once appeared in bodies very different from ours. The possibility opens the door to imagining worlds that thrived and vanished long before ours began. When we turn our attention to the Mesozoic era, the age dominated by reptiles, imagination is often captured by sheer size. Popular images show towering predators with teeth like knives, or long-necked giants moving through swamps. Power, scale, and spectacle tend to define our view of dinosaurs, yet size alone is not the measure of potential intelligence. For more than 160 million years, dinosaurs filled every niche on land, air, and sea. Within that span, there was ample time for countless evolutionary experiments, and if intelligence can arise in crows and parrots, living descendants of these reptiles, why should we dismiss the possibility that their ancient relatives once carried minds more complex than we usually imagine? Brain size alone does not tell the full story, but it does offer clues. Some smaller theropods, especially those closely related to early birds, had relatively large brains for their bodies. They possessed keen vision, balance, and coordination. Fossil evidence suggests that some may have cared for their young, built nests, and perhaps hunted cooperatively. These behaviours in living species often correlate with social learning and problem solving. We know that intelligence tends to flourish in animals that must navigate complex environments, cooperate, and adapt quickly. If such conditions existed in certain dinosaur lineages, the possibility of intelligence is not far-fetched. Modern birds, after all, are living proof of what dinosaurs were capable of. Crows bend wires into hooks to extract food. Parrots learn and teach vocal patterns unique to their flocks. Some species recognize themselves in mirrors, an ability once thought uniquely human. These are sparks of cognition, tiny lights that, given enough time, could grow brighter. If such abilities exist now, it is at least imaginable that their ancestors, in long stretches of the past, took similar steps. The challenge is that behaviour rarely fossilizes. Bones tell us shape and size, but not thought. We can trace trackways preserved in mud that hardened into stone, and these sometimes show herds moving in formation, or parents walking alongside smaller juveniles. These details hint at social bonds, but the rest is silent. If any lineage of dinosaur had developed behaviours edging toward culture, we would struggle to see it through fossils alone. A tool carved from wood, a shelter made of woven branches, a pattern scratched into soft ground, all would have vanished without trace over millions of years. Yet it is intriguing to ask what such a civilization might have looked like. Had it existed, it would not have resembled our own. Dinosaurs lacked hands with the fine dexterity of primates. They may have used claws, beaks, or even feet to manipulate objects. Their technology, if we can call it that, would have followed different pathways, perhaps arranging natural materials rather than shaping them with precision. They might have built with mud and vegetation, creating platforms or nests that were maintained across generations. Their communication might have relied less on written symbols and more on sound, colour, or movement, languages of display rather than of ink. We imagine civilization as stone cities, but that is our bias, shaped by what endures. A dinosaur civilization might never have left monuments of granite or marble. Instead, it might have left temporary but repeated marks on landscapes. Gathering places returned to season after season, riverbanks reshaped by use, vegetation managed to favour certain plants. To us, those traces would be indistinguishable from natural variation. Yet to them, they might have carried meaning as deep as any of our cities. The reign of dinosaurs ended 66 million years ago, but their time on Earth was vastly longer than ours has been so far. We have existed as a species for less than 500,000 years. Our civilizations are only a few thousand years old. Dinosaurs had more than 100 million years in which intelligence might have flickered in forms now lost. The odds are long, but not unthinkable. Evolution does not follow a single track. It branches, experiments, fails, and sometimes succeeds in ways we would never expect. Of course, it is tempting to let imagination race too far. We do not need to picture tyrannosaurs building temples or triceratops carving art, but smaller, quicker, social species could have explored forms of intelligence that remain hidden from us. Their descendants, the birds, still surprise us today with tool use, memory, and even what looks like play. It is humbling to think that in their lineage, cognition was never absent, only reshaped. Even if a civilization of dinosaurs never existed, their story reminds us that intelligence is not guaranteed to look like us. It does not require upright posture, hands, or speech. It only requires a brain capable of abstraction, a body capable of expression, and an environment that rewards cooperation and innovation. That combination may have come together before, and if it did, its traces may be gone, erased by the same asteroid impact that ended the Mesozoic, or by the slow grind of geology that followed. The thought is not meant to replace science with fantasy, but to widen the space of what we allow ourselves to wonder. We know intelligence can take many forms. We know time is long enough for experiments far beyond our own. We know the record of life is full of gaps. Between those three truths, a door opens to possibility. Dinosaurs may never have walked through it, but the Earth has given them the chance. And if not them, then perhaps others, in other ages, under other skies. From this point, our journey cannot avoid turning toward the oceans. If land is restless and forgetful, constantly reshaped, the seas are even more mysterious. They cover most of the planet, hide its tallest mountains and deepest valleys, and hold ecosystems we barely understand. If civilizations are fragile on land, what hope would we have of finding them beneath the waves? And yet, the oceans are where life first grew complex, and where some of the most remarkable minds alive today still dwell. If we are to wonder about civilizations before us, we must not forget the deep blue world that covers the majority of our planet. If the land is restless and forgetful, constantly reshaped by mountains and ice, then the oceans are something else entirely. They are the oldest, deepest memory of Earth, stretching back to the planet's earliest days, and yet they remain largely hidden from us. More than 2/3 of the globe is water, and beneath those rolling waves lie landscapes stranger and more dramatic than anything we see on land. Ranges of mountains taller than the Himalayas, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, plains of volcanic rock that stretch for thousands of miles. For all our satellites and maps, we have barely touched the seafloor. Most of it remains unvisited, unseen, and unknown. Life began in these waters long before it took hold on land. For hundreds of millions of years, the oceans were the only stage, the only arena where evolution played its experiments. Even after forests and deserts emerged, the seas continued to harbour their own great dramas. Entire lineages rose and vanished there, leaving fossils only in sediments that now lie buried under miles of rock. If there was ever a place for civilizations to appear and vanish without a trace, the ocean might be the perfect host. And when we look at the minds that exist today beneath the waves, the idea becomes less abstract. Consider the whales, enormous and ancient in their lineage. Some species communicate across entire ocean basins, their songs carrying patterns that shift with seasons, perhaps even with culture. These calls are not random. They can be learned, shared, and modified. That suggests memory and transmission, key elements of culture. Dolphins, smaller but no less remarkable, teach each other hunting techniques, some involving tools like sponges used to protect their snouts while foraging. These behaviours pass down through generations, creating traditions distinct to particular groups. Then there are the octopuses, those solitary but astonishing creatures with nervous systems unlike any other. Their brains extend into their arms, allowing them to manipulate objects with dexterity unmatched in the sea. They can solve puzzles, remember solutions, and even open jars designed by humans. Their intelligence is alien to us, shaped by an evolutionary path entirely separate, and yet it converges on something we recognise: curiosity, problem solving, even play. If such minds exist today, only a short span into humanity's story, what might have been possible if one of these lineages had millions of extra years to evolve without us? The difficulty lies not in imagining intelligence, but in imagining technology underwater. Our picture of civilization is rooted in fire, stone, and metal, materials difficult to use in the sea. But technology does not need to mirror ours. An aquatic civilization might have shaped coral reefs into structures, woven kelp and shell into tools, or cultivated patterns of sound and light to communicate and record. It might have worked with volcanic rock on the seafloor, or even used the electrical and chemical properties of the ocean itself in ways beyond our grasp. To us, these would leave faint or no traces in the long term. Organic materials dissolve, coral changes form, sediments shift and bury. The ocean erases faster than it preserves. Even today, human history beneath the sea is fragile. Shipwrecks dissolve in salt water within centuries, sometimes decades. Wooden hulls are devoured by microbes and worms. Metal corrodes into rust and vanishes. Only under rare conditions, sealed in mud, buried in oxygen-poor water, do relics survive for more than a few thousand years. Multiply that fragility across millions of years, and the odds of finding traces shrink close to nothing. A civilization, built of kelp, shell, or coral, would disappear almost entirely, its memory swallowed by tides and sediments. But just as on land, the earth may preserve whispers, fossil reefs sometimes reveal long-dead ecosystems frozen in stone. Shell beds can remain, recording communities that live together. Chemical signatures can mark sudden shifts in ocean composition. If a marine civilization altered its environment, harvesting on a large scale, releasing byproducts, or rearranging ecosystems, such changes might linger in subtle ways. A scientist looking at a core sample from the seafloor could find an unusual layer and not know whether it came from climate, geology, or something else. It is tempting to picture grand scenes, cities beneath the waves, lights shimmering through dark water, vast networks of coral shaped into designs. But perhaps reality would have been quieter, more elusive, a scattered intelligence spread through pods or colonies, shaping its world lightly but deliberately. No monuments to withstand time, only patterns erased by the next tide. If such a society existed, it might be invisible to us now. Not because it never was, but because the ocean does not keep such secrets long. And yet the possibility matters. It shifts how we think about intelligence. It reminds us that civilization is not tied to dry land, to fire, or to stone. It could emerge wherever life has the means to imagine and to share. The oceans have been here longer than forests, deserts, or grasslands. They have seen countless lineages come and go, To assume that none of them ever crossed the threshold into culture may be safer, but it may also be short-sighted. Even today, when we listen to the complex songs of whales or watch an octopus unscrew a jar, or see dolphins pass hunting traditions to their young, we are reminded that the seeds of civilization exist outside of us. They may not look like our cities, but they echo with the same qualities: memory, innovation, cooperation, curiosity. If we give them time, millions of years of time, the difference between clever animals and culture-building beings begins to blur. The question is not whether we will ever prove such a thing. The odds are against us. The ocean erases almost everything. But the question asks us to expand what we mean when we say civilization. It challenges the arrogance of assuming land, stone, and written language are the only forms it could take. It asks us to see intelligence not as rare and singular, but as something that might bloom in many forms, under many conditions, across the vast laboratory of life. And if the seas have hosted such civilizations before, they may yet host them again. Evolution continues its experiments, shaping minds in unexpected places. Perhaps in some far future, long after we are gone, another intelligence will rise beneath the waves, unbothered by our absence, unaware of our existence, carrying forward a new story in the endless continuity of Earth. The further back we peer into Earth's past, the more the ground itself begins to feel like an unreliable witness. We often speak of the fossil record as if it were a library, each stratum a page filled with details about the world that existed when it was laid down. But a closer look reveals that this library is not complete. Whole shelves are missing, many chapters are torn, and countless words have been blurred by time. What we hold are fragments, stitched together into stories that always contain more silence than sound. Fossils form only under rare alignments of chance. A creature dies, and instead of being scattered by scavengers or dissolved by weather, it is buried quickly, perhaps by mud, volcanic ash, or sediment washed in by a flood. If sealed in the right conditions, its bones may slowly transform, replaced by minerals that preserve its shape. Even then, survival is uncertain. Pressure may crush it, heat may distort it, erosion may expose it too soon. For every fossil we find, countless others have been erased before they ever had the chance to form. This uneven record shapes everything we think we know. Dinosaurs dominate our imagination, not only because they were real, but because they left behind enough bones and teeth to reconstruct them. Countless other creatures lived alongside them, yet we know little or nothing of their forms, because conditions never favoured their preservation. When we imagine Earth's past, we are picturing not the whole, but the lucky fragments, biased toward environments that preserve them. Riverbeds, deltas, seabeds, and ash plains. Forest dwellers, desert wanderers, or coastal builders may have vanished without a trace. The same applies to civilizations. If one had ever emerged millions of years before us, it would have faced impossible odds of being preserved. A wooden tool left on the forest floor, a woven shelter by the coast, a trail of footprints across sand. These would dissolve within years. Even stone carvings, if not buried quickly, would erode. A settlement of mud or plant fibre would vanish within centuries. In geological time, these are no more than sparks extinguished in an instant. Unless extraordinary luck intervened, nothing would survive for us to find. Even if traces did endure, recognition would be another hurdle. A piece of worked stone could be dismissed as a natural fracture unless surrounded by context. A patch of unusual soil chemistry might be explained by volcanic activity rather than industry. Straight lines in rock formations may be attributed to natural fracturing rather than construction. Nature is a mimic, producing patterns that resemble design. Without careful interpretation, and without expecting civilization at all, evidence might pass unnoticed. This is why absence of evidence cannot be taken as evidence of absence. The silence in the fossil record tells us more about the fragility of preservation than it does about what never was. Entire lineages have risen and disappeared with barely a whisper left behind. Consider the soft-bodied creatures of the early Cambrian, known mostly from a few rare deposits like the Burgess Shale. Without those accidental preservations, we might never suspect such diversity existed at all. The same could be true of intelligence if it flared briefly in some lineage and the circumstances of preservation were never right, we would never know. And even when evidence does survive, interpretation is not simple. The line between natural and artificial is fine. A round hill might be the weathered remains of a volcano or the remnants of a mound built deliberately. A straight channel in stone might be a river carved by water or a canal cut by intention. The difference lies not in the form alone, but in the context, the patterns that surround it. To see such context requires us to ask the right questions. Without the question, the anomaly is just another curiosity. Our own history is full of rediscoveries. Ancient ruins, once dismissed as natural rock formations, have later been recognized as cities. Carved stones mistaken for geologic oddities have been revealed as artifacts. If this happens with remains only a few thousand years old, how much more easily could we misinterpret traces from millions of years ago? Our perception is guided by expectation. If we do not expect civilization in deep time, we may never see it, even if it is faintly there. What this reveals is less about certainty than about humility. Science is careful by nature, skeptical by design. It seeks natural explanations first because they are most common. But it also knows that knowledge is provisional, that new evidence can reshape entire narratives. Once dinosaurs were imagined as slow, dim-witted reptiles. Now we see them as active, often bird-like, some with feathers, colours, and social lives. Once we thought the Earth itself was static. Now we know continents drift across the globe. Our picture of the past keeps changing as new pieces are found. To wonder about forgotten civilizations is not to discard science, but to accept that the canvas is incomplete. Perhaps one day, someone studying a cliff or drilling a core sample will notice something odd, an anomaly too stubborn for natural explanations. Perhaps they will see it not as noise but as signal, the whisper of a story erased but not entirely gone. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the evidence, if it ever existed, is gone beyond recovery. Either way, the question remains valuable. It stretches our imagination, reminding us that the world is deeper and stranger than we often allow ourselves to believe. The fossil record does not give us certainty. It gives us fragments, and from those fragments we weave possibilities. Most of those possibilities are natural, grounded in what we know, but a few may point beyond, into territory we have not yet explored. The silence between the fossils is not empty, it is an invitation to wonder. And so we stand at the edge of what is knowable, looking into a darkness where the record fades. Behind that veil may lie only forests, oceans, and creatures lost to time. Or it may hide stories stranger still, stories of minds that built, dreamed, and disappeared before we arrived. The earth does not answer, it only holds its silence, but in that silence our questions echo, and sometimes that is enough. When we think of civilization, we picture structures, towers of stone, walls of brick, avenues paved in patterns meant to last. But monuments are not the only way a society shapes its world. Often the most enduring marks are not buildings at all, but changes to ecosystems, alterations in the fabric of land, water, and life that ripple far beyond the lifespan of those who made them. Even if every artifact were erased, such changes might still whisper across the ages. Consider our own species. In only a few thousand years, we have cut down forests that once stretched across continents. We have diverted rivers, drained wetlands, reshaped coastlines, and built reservoirs where none existed before. Entire regions have been transformed, their ecosystems reorganized to serve agriculture, settlement, and industry. These alterations are not fleeting. Seeds of plants once carried only by wind or bird now travel continents in human hands. Animals once confined to narrow ranges now live across the globe, while others have vanished altogether. In the geological record, these shifts will appear as sudden rearrangements in the distribution of life, species disappearing from one layer of sediment, appearing abruptly in another, or proliferating far beyond their natural range. Such patterns may be detectable long after walls have crumbled. A civilization that spread crops across wide territories, even without stone cities, would alter the pollen record in soils and sediments. Archaeologists today already detect the beginnings of agriculture by analysing such microscopic remains. If a non-human civilization had once cultivated or transported plants, traces of that activity could persist, even if their tools or homes are long gone. In the same way, overhunting or the domestication of animals would leave echoes in fossil distributions. The sudden reduction of certain species, the appearance of others in unexpected places, these are signals of culture at work. The transformation of landscapes can also leave enduring scars. Terraces cut into hillsides, irrigation channels, or managed forests may eventually erode, but in some cases their outlines can persist for millennia. Even when filled with soil, the differences in composition or drainage remain detectable by those who know how to read them. If such practices occurred millions of years ago, their traces might have been buried deeply, but in stable regions faint patterns could survive, waiting in the strata for someone to notice. Of course, nature itself produces dramatic shifts. Climate changes, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, all of which can reorder ecosystems in ways that mimic civilization's footprint. The challenge is always to distinguish signal from noise, intention from accident. But the key is pattern. A single extinction might be natural. A suite of coordinated changes could suggest something more. A sudden spread of one plant species far from its origin, coupled with declines of large animals, coupled with unusual soil chemistry, together these begin to tell a different kind of story. It is sobering to realize that our most enduring legacy may not be our art or architecture, but our disruptions to the biosphere. The Anthropocene, as some scientists call it, is marked by extinctions, invasive species, and altered carbon cycles. Millions of years from now, if another intelligence examines the record, these shifts may stand out more clearly than the faint traces of our cities. They may see the sudden disappearance of countless species, the appearance of others in unnatural places, the chemical fingerprints of fertilizers and plastics. That would be the story we leave, not the story of monuments, but of ecosystems reshaped. If we take this insight and look backward, it opens unsettling possibilities. Could there already be layers in Earth's history where sudden, unexplained ecological shifts occurred? We know of several. The fossil record shows abrupt extinctions, strange bursts of new species, and changes in vegetation that defy easy explanation. Most of these can be attributed to natural events: asteroid impacts, volcanic floods, climate swings. But could one or two hold traces of something else? A hand not of geology but of culture? The idea cannot be dismissed entirely, though it remains speculative. Even without proof, thinking this way expands our imagination. A civilization might not need to build pyramids or empires to alter the earth. It could leave no monuments, yet still leave a lasting record in the life around it. Imagine a society of tool-using primates that never invented cities, but still cleared forests in patches, hunted certain animals to scarcity, and favoured particular plants. Or imagine an intelligent marine species cultivating reefs, encouraging some coral while suppressing others, herding schools of fish, or shaping seabeds to suit their needs. Such behaviours, repeated across generations, could change ecosystems in ways that persist even after the society itself is gone. But would we recognise those changes for what they are? That is the deeper question. When we see sudden extinctions in the record, we assume catastrophe. When we see new species appearing in strange places, we assume migration by natural means. These are reasonable conclusions, and they are often correct. Yet hidden among them, perhaps, could be the faint outline of intention, a signature of minds altering their world, erased in all other respects but lingering in the arrangement of life. This possibility reframes what we mean by evidence. It is not always about objects you can hold, but about patterns you can read. Civilization may announce itself not through ruins, but through disruptions. And the earth, while forgetful in many ways, is not always quick to erase such disruptions. Species displaced or extinguished remain absent forever. Pollen records preserve ancient vegetation. Chemical traces in soil linger long after their makers are gone. These are the threads by which we might someday glimpse the outlines of forgotten cultures. The thought leaves us humbled. We are accustomed to imagining history as a sequence of monuments, artifacts, and artifacts. But the true measure of civilization may be ecological, how it reshapes the living world around it. By that measure, humans are unmistakably a civilization, but perhaps not the only one that has ever been. Others may have walked or swum paths now hidden, their traces woven into the fossil record, not as stone ruins, but as absences and presences in the web of life. And if such a story lies buried, waiting, what would it tell us about ourselves? Perhaps that intelligence is not unique, that culture is not guaranteed to endure, and that even the most powerful societies can vanish, leaving only the faintest ecological scars. To search for such signs is to accept the possibility that our own permanence is fragile. The earth will forget our buildings, but it will remember our disruptions, and that is both a warning and a gift. A reminder that civilizations pass, but the patterns they leave behind endure, sometimes long enough to outlast memory itself. The word civilization carries heavy baggage. When we hear it, we immediately picture vast cities, monumental architecture, systems of writing, and the trappings of empire. In school books and documentaries, civilization begins with the first farmers, the first walls, the first scripts scratched into clay. But what if our definition is too narrow? What if civilization is not measured by stone but by memory, not by monuments but by meaning? If so, our search for civilizations past may be shaped less by what existed and more by what we expect to see. We assume permanence is the measure of significance. Pyramids endure, ziggurats endure, Stone temples endure, and so they dominate our understanding of what civilization means. But permanence is an accident of material. Societies that build in wood, reed, fibre, or earth may leave little behind, even if their cultures were rich and complex. In fact, many living human societies today depend on such materials, and if they vanished tomorrow, little would survive the test of millennia. The fragility of evidence does not diminish the depth of their culture. It only means their stories are harder to see from the distance of time. Writing is another threshold often used to define civilization. We imagine history beginning with symbols fixed on clay or papyrus. Yet memory does not require writing. Oral traditions can carry vast libraries of knowledge across generations. Myth, song, ritual, and performance can preserve laws, stories, and science without a single mark on stone. These traditions are fragile to us because they leave little physical trace, but for the people who live them, they are as enduring as any monument. If we equate civilization with writing alone, we may miss the possibility that entire cultures once flourished without it, and in their passing left nothing we would recognize. Even our idea of technology is shaped by our path. Fire, metal, wheels, engines, these are the milestones we mark. But technology is broader than that. It is any tool or system by which a species shapes its environment to its advantage. For a civilization of dolphins, sound itself could be technology, used not only for communication, but for mapping, hunting, and perhaps even creating shared mental spaces through song. For a civilization of primates without cities, technology might be ecological management, planting, pruning, and guiding forests to yield what is needed. These forms of technology would be invisible to us after millions of years. We look for stone axes and bronze artifacts, but if a culture never made them, its ingenuity might pass unrecognized. What this reveals is that our search for past civilizations is shaped by our own reflection. We look for ourselves in the record, cities like ours, writing like ours, tools like ours. When we do not find them, we assume nothing was there. This is human bias at its most subtle. It does not deny the possibility outright, but it narrows the scope of what counts as evidence. We forget that intelligence, culture, and civilization could take forms alien to our expectations. Imagine for a moment a culture that did not build cities at all, but lived in migratory cycles, shaping landscapes lightly as they moved. Their civilization might consist of knowledge carried in memory, traditions repeated across seasons, relationships with animals and plants that endured for generations. To us, this might look like nothing more than the shifting patterns of ecology. To them, it could have been as profound as our empires. If such a culture had existed millions of years ago, it would vanish without leaving ruins, but that would not mean it never was. Or, imagine a species that built entirely within caves, deep below the surface. Their homes would be hidden from weather, their tools perhaps made of bone or clay that would not endure. If their caves collapsed, flooded, or melted away under tectonic forces, nothing would remain but voids in rock, indistinguishable from natural formations. We would never know that culture had once lit those chambers with fire or filled them with voices. Even our measure of complexity may be misleading. We assume that the more advanced a civilization, the more it must expand, dominate, and transform. But what if the opposite were true? What if the most advanced civilizations were those that learned to live in balance, leaving almost no trace behind? From our perspective, such cultures would be invisible, yet their absence of ruins might not be failure but success, a harmony so complete that the Earth absorbed them without a scar. To define civilization only by what survives is to risk mistaking invisibility for non-existence. The lesson here is humility. Our categories, our thresholds, our milestones, they are human inventions, useful for telling our story, but not necessarily universal. If we want to imagine the possibility of forgotten civilizations, we must loosen those categories. We must allow that culture can exist without stone, that knowledge can exist without writing, that technology can exist without metal. We must be willing to imagine forms of civilization that do not resemble us, and therefore may not leave the kind of evidence we expect. This shift in perspective also changes how we view our own place in time. If intelligence and culture can take many forms, then our version is one among many possible. Not the inevitable outcome of evolution, but a single thread in a tapestry with countless others. We may be the first to leave skyscrapers, but perhaps not the first to tell stories, to build traditions, to shape the world in ways that mattered. Our arrogance makes us think we are the pinnacle, but the Earth is old enough to have tried many experiments. We are simply the one that remains visible now. And perhaps that is the true challenge, to look into the deep past not for ourselves, but for others, to search without assuming what form civilization must take, to accept that even if we never find proof, the possibility is worth holding, because it reminds us that the universe of intelligence is larger than we imagine. By loosening our definitions, we open ourselves to wonder. By acknowledging our bias, we make room for the unexpected. And in doing so, we come closer to hearing whatever faint echoes may still linger from civilizations we can barely conceive. If we wish to measure the likelihood of forgotten civilizations, one place to begin is with ourselves. Imagine the Earth millions of years from now, long after our cities have fallen silent. What will remain of us? What fragments, if any, will future beings find? And what stories will they tell from the fragments we leave behind? At first thought, our monuments seem mighty enough to last. The pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the skyscrapers of our metropolises, all appear immovable against time. But history teaches otherwise. Even the strongest stone erodes under wind and rain. Steel rusts, concrete crumbles, glass fractures, and returns to sand. Abandon a city for only a few centuries, and already trees rise through its avenues. Rivers reclaim its foundations. Within 10,000 years, most structures would be reduced to rubble. In 1,000,000 years, they would be gone entirely, folded into the landscape. Our pride in permanence is measured only against human time, not geological time. There are exceptions, of course. Certain materials may survive longer than others. Ceramics, for instance, are remarkably durable. A broken shard of pottery can outlast an empire, lying buried until rediscovered. Some plastics, too, degrade so slowly that traces of them may linger, though altered far into the future. Metal objects, if buried in the right conditions, may fossilize, transformed into mineral relics. Yet even these survivors are vulnerable to tectonic processes that recycle the Earth's crust. Given enough time, continents are not fixed. They drift, collide, and are consumed. No artifact can withstand the mantle forever. But perhaps we will be remembered less by objects than by chemistry. Our industry has changed the composition of the atmosphere, adding carbon dioxide in concentrations unseen for millions of years. Layers of sediment now capture this change, preserving a chemical fingerprint of our time. Radioactive isotopes, spread by nuclear testing, form a thin band across the globe. Microplastics, too small to see, are settling into soils and seas, embedding themselves in the fabric of geology. These traces may endure long after stone and steel have vanished. They are the invisible shadows of our age. Now imagine a future intelligence arriving tens of millions of years hence. Perhaps it will not be human at all. Perhaps it will be some other species that rises long after us, inheriting the earth with its own perspective. Or perhaps it will be something from beyond, visiting and curious about what came before. What will they find? They may drill into rock cores and discover an unusual layer, dense with isotopes, chemical shifts, and fragments of synthetic compounds. To them, it will appear as a strange pulse of activity, a brief geological firework. They may not recognize skyscrapers, or literature, or music. They may not even know that the signals point to intelligence. They may simply record it as a mysterious event, a warming, a die-off, an anomaly of unknown origin. And this is the humbling truth. The sum of human history, with its art and wars and inventions, may be reduced to a thin line in stone, its meaning unclear. The names we write, the monuments we build, the knowledge we prize, all of it may dissolve, leaving behind only chemical whispers. To us this feels tragic, but to the earth it is natural. Time does not favour meaning, it favours change. There is irony here. We think of our civilizations as permanent, yet our most enduring marks may be the unintended ones. The pollutants, the disruptions, the scars left on ecosystems. These are what will endure, not our cathedrals or our libraries. An alien archaeologist might not see a world of cities and nations, but only a sudden burst of extinctions, a spike in carbon, and a scattering of unusual molecules. From that alone, what story would they tell? Would they see us as destroyers, as innovators, as a brief but intense experiment of life? Or would we be nothing more than a puzzle, a strange chemical layer with no clear interpretation? This thought brings perspective to the question of past civilizations. If our own world, with satellites orbiting above and billions of people shaping the surface, can be reduced in time to such subtle traces, then how much more easily could a smaller, earlier civilization vanish? The odds of recognition are low, the chances of survival slim. We are reminded that permanence is a fragile illusion. Even our grandest achievements are vulnerable to the tide of time. And yet this fragility does not erase meaning. Our monuments may crumble, but the fact that they were built matters to us now. Our stories may not endure in stone, but they endure in the moment of telling. Perhaps that is the lesson. Civilization is not defined by what survives, but by what it creates in its own time. The earth may forget us, but in living, we write our chapter, however fleeting. When we reflect on this, the line between our story and possible forgotten stories grows thin. If another civilization once existed, it too may have risen, shaped its world, and vanished without trace. Its meaning may not be in its endurance, but in its presence while it lived. We may never know it, but the possibility invites us to see ourselves differently, not as the first or the only, but as one among many possibilities in the long memory of Earth. And if we accept this, then the silence of the geological record is no longer empty. It becomes full of potential, full of the lives that might have been. Perhaps nothing was there, or perhaps much was, but either way, the silence humbles us. It reminds us that we are temporary, that our place in the cosmos is not fixed, that the meaning of civilization is not permanence, but participation in the grand experiment of life. So when we wonder what will remain of us, the answer may be both less and more than we hope. Less because our cities will vanish, more because the earth itself will carry the mark of our presence, however faint. And in that faintness lies the connection to every species that has come before, to every possibility that may yet arise, to the hidden civilizations we imagine but cannot prove. We are part of the same story, a story not of permanence but of change. When we talk about civilization, we often imagine it as a straight line. It begins somewhere, perhaps in the river valleys of Mesopotamia or along the Nile, and then advances step by step until it reaches us. This is the story we tell ourselves, a march of progress, ever upward, ever forward. But nature does not move in straight lines. It moves in cycles, spirals, and waves. Forests grow, burn, and regrow. Species rise, flourish, and fade. Oceans expand and retreat. Ice sheets advance and melt. Why should civilization be any different? If intelligence has bloomed on Earth before, it may not have been a single spark but many, rising and vanishing in rhythms we can barely guess. Our own history already shows this pattern. Human civilizations themselves are not continuous lines, but broken arcs. The Indus Valley built great cities with plumbing and grids, only to vanish into obscurity, leaving their script unreadable to this day. The Maya carved temples deep in the jungles, their mathematics and astronomy precise, their calendars complex, before their society collapsed, scattered and transformed. The ruins of Angkor in Cambodia, swallowed by trees, remind us that even grand empires can dissolve into silence within a few centuries. If such collapses can happen in mere thousands of years, what might millions do? Now imagine that this cyclical rhythm is not confined to us but part of the planet itself. Intelligence may not be a once-in-eternity event, but something that rises when conditions allow. Climate stability, ecological richness, evolutionary chance. These alignments may foster not just life, but minds capable of culture. But when those conditions shift, civilizations falter. They vanish, leaving space for new experiments to unfold. Each is a wave upon the ocean of time, rising high, then breaking, then gone. What survives of each wave depends less on what it builds than on how long it lasts. A civilization that endures for only a few thousand years may leave almost nothing after millions. A civilization that lasts for millions, however, may change the planet in ways visible far into the future. But perhaps most civilizations, like most species, are brief. They flare and vanish, leaving little but faint disturbances in the record. In this way, Earth may have seen not one, but several civilizations, each erased by time, each unaware of the ones that came before. The thought is sobering because it reflects back on us. We tend to believe our civilization is permanent, or at least uniquely durable. But history suggests otherwise. Collapse is not an exception, it is a recurring feature. Famines, droughts, epidemics and wars remind us how fragile the systems we depend upon can be. We live in a moment of abundance, but abundance has faltered before. The earth is patient, and when climates shift or disasters strike, it reclaims what we build. If we imagine forgotten civilizations in the past, we must also imagine our own fragility in the present. There is another humbling angle. If civilizations rise and fall, perhaps the earth is not simply an indifferent host, but a kind of crucible that keeps trying. Intelligence may be a recurring experiment, not a one-time miracle. We are one version of the outcome, but not necessarily the first and certainly not the last. This possibility changes how we see ourselves. We are not at the pinnacle of progress, but part of a larger rhythm, one crest among many. Cycles also reshape how we think about discovery. If a civilization before us rose and fell, its traces might be hidden beneath ours. If another civilization comes after us, it may one day uncover our chemical fingerprints and wonder the same things we do now. Were there others before? What became of them? What mistakes did they make? Perhaps the future will hold not answers, but echoes, each civilization asking the same questions, unaware that others once asked them too. Our myths often hint at cycles without naming them. Flood stories appear across cultures, describing worlds destroyed and reborn. Legends of golden ages tell of times when knowledge was greater, now lost. Even in fiction, we return to this theme. Lost cities, forgotten empires, ruins beneath ruins. Perhaps these are not prophecies, but intuitions, a recognition that the rise and fall of civilizations is part of the pattern of life. What would it mean if we are living not the first, but simply the latest cycle? For one, it would remind us that permanence is an illusion. The earth is not concerned with preserving our story. It will wipe the slate clean, as it has done before. For another, it would remind us that intelligence is resilient. If it has bloomed more than once, it will bloom again, even if we fail. That thought can be strangely comforting. It suggests that the universe of minds is larger than we imagine, and that life, once it learns to dream, will find ways to dream again. But there is also a warning hidden in this possibility. If others before us have risen and vanished, then intelligence is not protection against extinction. Culture, knowledge, and technology do not guarantee survival. Civilizations may collapse for reasons beyond their control. Shifting climate, asteroid strike, volcanic eruption. Or they may collapse for reasons within their control. Overuse of resources, conflict, failure to adapt. If cycles are natural, then perhaps what matters is not to break them but to learn humility in the face of them. Standing in this awareness, our place in history feels different. We are not at the dawn of something eternal. We are in the middle of a rhythm that stretches long before us and will continue long after. Our task is not to claim permanence, but to participate wisely while we are here. If our cycle must end, let it at least leave behind a story worth telling, a mark that, however faint, reflects care as well as ambition. And if there were cycles before us lost and forgotten, perhaps we can still learn from the idea of them. They remind us that arrogance is misplaced, that fragility is real, and that our choices matter. For though time will erase much, the patterns we set in motion, ecological, chemical, cultural, may ripple farther than we imagine. To live in awareness of cycles is not to despair, but to walk with humility, knowing that we are not the first wave and will not be the last. Even when stone erodes and wood decays, stories have a way of lingering. They travel through memory, whispered around fires carved into ritual, passed from parent to child. Over time, they grow, change, and lose their original context, yet something of their shape remains. Myths are not history in the strict sense, but they are carriers of memory, vessels for truths that words alone cannot hold. When we listen carefully, we sometimes hear not just imagination, but echoes, faint reverberations of experiences long past. Could it be that some of humanity's oldest stories are distant shadows of cycles that came before us? Across cultures, flood myths appear with striking regularity. The Mesopotamian story of Utnapishtim, the biblical tale of Noah, the Hindu narrative of Manu, the Greek myth of Deucalion, the Aztec and Mayan accounts of great floods, all speak of a world swept away by waters, of civilizations drowned, of survivors rebuilding. To scholars, these may reflect real events, river floods, rising seas at the end of the Ice Age, disasters magnified in memory. Yet their ubiquity also raises a curious possibility. Are they simply independent metaphors for destruction and renewal, Or do they echo something deeper, an ancient recognition that civilizations rise, fall, and sometimes vanish beneath the tide of time? Likewise, myths of golden ages abound. Ancient Greece spoke of an age when humans lived in harmony with gods, before decline set in. Hindu cosmology describes vast cycles of time, yugas, where civilizations rise to greatness and then decay into chaos before beginning anew. The Maya recorded similar cycles, counting time in vast epochs beyond human scale. Even in cultures far apart, the idea recurs that our present is not the first world, but one of many, built upon ruins invisible to us. To dismiss these as pure invention may be too easy. Perhaps they are imaginative expressions of a truth our bones already know, that impermanence is the rule, not the exception. Archaeology sometimes brushes close to this intersection of myth and memory. Ruins once thought legendary, Troy, Knossos, Machu Picchu, have been uncovered, revealing that stories dismissed as fiction were grounded in real places and real people. What if some myths carry memories far older, memories not of our civilizations, but of cycles erased before ours? The possibility is difficult to prove, yet it lingers like a question hidden between the lines of every epic. Even the idea of beings who taught humanity, culture heroes who brought fire, agriculture, or knowledge, appears again and again. Prometheus in Greek myth, Quetzalcoatl among the Aztecs, Oannes in Mesopotamia, Viracocha in the Andes. These figures arrive from elsewhere, bearing gifts of civilization, then vanish. Psychologically, they may embody the mystery of sudden innovation, the way new skills seem to appear as if from outside. But in the speculative space, they raise another question. Are these simply symbols or faint memories of contact not with gods, but with remnants of older cycles, older intelligences who left behind fragments of their knowledge before fading? To wander down this path is to step into delicate territory. Myth is not evidence, it is narrative, metaphor, and dream. Yet myth is also how human beings preserve experience across spans longer than written history. Before we had archives, we had storytellers, and storytellers, in their way, are archivists of memory. A great flood, a golden age, a gift of fire. These may not be literal records, but neither are they random. They endure because they touch something in us, something shaped by long acquaintance with change, loss, and the mystery of beginnings. Even today, we see how memory transforms over generations. A natural disaster becomes a legend of divine wrath. A lost city becomes a tale of paradise. Over centuries, the line between fact and metaphor blurs. In this process, history becomes myth, and myth becomes timeless. If civilizations existed before us, their stories may have survived not in stone, but in symbols, not in ruins, but in rhythms of myth retold again and again, stripped of specifics but carrying the echo of something real. We might never know if such echoes exist, but entertaining the idea shifts our perspective. It reminds us that human imagination is not a distraction from reality, but part of it, shaped by the same forces of memory and survival that shape bones and tools. Our myths are not merely fantasies, they are fossils of thought, preserved in the strata of language and culture. And just as fossils in rock can hint at creatures long gone, myths may hint at civilizations forgotten. Of course, science must tread carefully here. To claim myths as literal history risks falling into fantasy, but to dismiss them entirely risks losing the subtle truths they carry. The middle path is to listen, to ask what they reveal about our intuition of cycles, about our awareness of fragility, about our deep suspicion that we are not the first nor the last to walk this earth with minds that dream. In this way, myth becomes part of the investigation, not proof but provocation, not evidence but an invitation to wonder. If myths of floods, golden ages, and lost teachers resonate so widely across cultures, perhaps they reveal not a secret history, but a shared recognition that civilization is fragile, that worlds end and begin again, that we are participants in a story much larger than ourselves. And so, when we consider the possibility of civilizations before us, myths remind us that the idea is not foreign. It is woven into our oldest stories, waiting at the edges of memory. Whether or not they are literal echoes, they shape how we think, how we imagine, and how we remain open to the vastness of time. In their rhythms, we hear not certainty, but possibility, and sometimes that is enough to widen our sense of what might be true. Every time we think we know the boundaries of history, the earth surprises us. Archaeology is a discipline built on fragments, and yet those fragments have a way of overturning certainties. A handful of stones, a buried wall, an unexpected carving. Suddenly timelines stretch, assumptions collapse, and we realise our story is older than we thought. If we have learned anything from archaeology, it is that our knowledge of the past is always provisional, always waiting for the next discovery. Consider Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. For decades, scholars believed that monumental architecture emerged only after agriculture, once people settled into farming communities. Yet here, 12,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers erected massive stone pillars carved with animals and symbols, forming what appears to be the world's first temple. The discovery forced a rethinking of the relationship between belief and agriculture. Perhaps it was not farming that enabled monuments, but monuments that inspired farming. Suddenly the neat progression from forager to farmer to city dweller became less certain. The past was not a straight ladder, but a branching, twisting tree. Or consider submerged ruins found along coasts now drowned by rising seas after the last ice age. Structures in the Gulf of Cambay in India, stone alignments off the coast of Japan at Yonaguni, and hints of settlements beneath the Mediterranean suggest that human societies may have built and thrived in regions now hidden beneath water. Whether all these are truly man-made or partly natural is debated, but the very presence of such mysteries reminds us how much is lost when sea levels rise. If this much can vanish in only 10,000 years, what might vanish in 100,000 or 1,000,000? Archaeology has also revealed how fragile our sense of continuity is. The great city of Cahokia once rose near the Mississippi, with plazas, pyramids of earth, and tens of thousands of inhabitants. Yet by the time Europeans arrived, it was gone, its people dispersed, its monuments hidden under trees. For centuries, many doubted such a city had ever existed, dismissing the mounds as natural. Only excavation proved otherwise. If we could overlook a city that flourished just 1,000 years ago on our own continent, how much more easily could traces of older civilizations slip from memory? The point is not that these discoveries prove forgotten civilizations before humanity. They do not, but they do prove something equally important. Our assumptions about the past are often wrong. We imagine we know where history begins and what it looks like, only to find evidence that shifts the starting line further back. Each discovery widens the horizon, showing that the human story is deeper, more complex, and more surprising than we dared to believe. And if this is true for a few thousand years, what might be true for millions? Archaeology teaches us humility in another way as well. through the sheer difficulty of preservation. Most sites are destroyed by time, weather, or human activity. Entire cultures are known only from a scattering of artifacts, their languages undeciphered. The Minoans left palaces and frescoes, but their script, Linear A, remains unread. The Indus Valley civilization left cities with plumbing and planning, but no one yet understands their writing. If this is the fate of societies only a few thousand years old, then what hope would we have of understanding a civilization millions of years older, if even a trace of it remained? And yet the act of searching is not futile. Archaeology is not about certainty, but about possibility. Each fragment uncovered is a voice from the past saying, "You did not know I was here." Each new discovery reminds us that our ignorance is vast, our certainty misplaced. The lesson applies not only to human history, but to the wider story of life on Earth. If forgotten civilizations existed, archaeology would not necessarily reveal them outright, but it would teach us to stay open, to expect surprises, to resist the arrogance of thinking we know where the story begins. There is also a symbolic dimension here. Sites like Göbekli Tepe or submerged ruins resonate with us not just because of their factual content, but because they remind us that the earth keeps secrets. Beneath every hill, beneath every wave, there may lie chapters unwritten in our books. Some of those chapters may extend human history. Others may reveal cultures that rose and fell without leaving written words. And beyond even those, perhaps, could be whispers from cycles before us, civilizations erased but not entirely forgotten. What archaeology shows us is that certainty is fragile. Every time we dig, we risk overturning the neat timelines we once thought solid, and that is the beauty of it. The past is not closed. It is alive, shifting, waiting to be reinterpreted. To wonder about forgotten civilizations is not to abandon science, but to follow its lesson. That knowledge grows not from certainty, but from surprise. So when we look at the ruins we have found, and the ruins we may yet find, we are reminded that history is deeper than we think, and time is more patient than we imagine. Our present sits atop layers we cannot fully see, and beneath those layers may lie stories stranger than we have yet conceived. Whether or not those stories include civilizations before us, the possibility alone teaches us to approach the past, not with arrogance, but with awe. When astronomers look to the stars in search of life, they do not expect to find monuments or ruins. They look for signals, faint chemical patterns in atmospheres, unusual emissions of light, traces of energy out of balance with nature. These are called technosignatures, the fingerprints of technology on a planetary scale. And while the search is usually directed outward, toward distant exoplanets, the logic can also turn inward. If civilizations may have existed on Earth before us, then perhaps their traces too would appear as technosignatures, not in the sky, but in the rocks beneath our feet. The first kind of technosignature is chemical. Our own civilization has altered the composition of the atmosphere in dramatic ways, pumping carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides into the air. These changes are so distinct that they could, in theory, be detected by an observer light years away. In the geological record, such changes appear as anomalies, sudden rises or falls in certain isotopes, layers enriched with unusual compounds. Already, scientists studying the Silurian hypothesis suggest that if another industrial society had once burned fuel, mined metals, or produced synthetic chemicals, the byproducts might linger in sediments as chemical scars. Even if buildings and tools eroded away, the air and soil would still bear witness. The second technosignature is energetic. Civilizations require power, and power leaves heat. The waste energy of industry, if large enough, produces a detectable glow in infrared. We look for this in the cosmos, scanning for planets or galaxies where waste heat exceeds natural expectation. On Earth, such signals would not survive directly over millions of years, but indirect evidence might remain. A sudden change in coal deposits, an unusual pattern of mineral depletion, or a layer of isotopes associated with fission or fusion could all hint at energy harnessed long ago. The Earth forgets quickly, but not perfectly. The third technosignature is structural, though subtle. On alien planets, we might hope to see patterns of light or geometry not produced by nature. On Earth, the analogue would be unnatural arrangements of minerals or stones, quarries stripped in unnatural ways, or landscapes reshaped beyond what erosion can explain. Most of these would be erased in deep time, but some scars might persist. Vast mining operations, for instance, that altered entire regions. We already detect such scars from our own history of extraction, written across mountains and valleys. Could some older scars be buried deeper, mistaken for natural features? Even our plastics and synthetic compounds are technosignatures of a kind. They are not produced by geology or biology alone. They are unmistakably industrial. In millions of years, plastics may break down, but fragments could remain, preserved in unusual conditions. Their chemical composition would be so out of place that any future scientists would immediately recognize them as artificial. The same might apply to earlier civilizations if they too had developed materials not otherwise found in nature. A thin band of unnatural compounds in sediments could be the faintest footprint of a world now lost. The challenge, as always, is separating signal from noise. Nature itself produces anomalies. Volcanoes release gases, meteorites scatter rare elements, shifting oceans leave chemical fingerprints. To mistake these for technology would be easy, but this is the art of the search, whether in astronomy or geology. We are not looking for certainty in a single piece of data, but for patterns that suggest intent, repetition, or scale. A layer rich in iridium is likely an asteroid impact. But if paired with other unusual anomalies, could it also suggest something else? In recent years, the search for technosignatures has expanded beyond radio signals to include atmospheric analysis of exoplanets. Instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope are capable of detecting chemical imbalances in distant atmospheres, oxygen without methane, or methane with carbon dioxide in unnatural ratios. These imbalances may hint at biology or technology. The same methods could, in principle, be applied to Earth's ancient atmosphere, preserved in bubbles of ice or trapped in sediments. Already, scientists study ancient ice cores for clues to past climates. Perhaps one day, someone will notice a chemical signature that resists natural explanation. This way of thinking creates an unexpected bridge. By looking outward for alien civilizations, we refine the tools to look inward for forgotten ones. The line between exarchaeology and geoarchaeology begins to blur. Whether we study starlight or stone, the question is the same. How do you detect intelligence when the beings themselves are gone? What makes this approach powerful is that it does not require proof of anything specific. It only requires openness to anomalies. Just as astronomers remain alert for signals that do not fit nature's patterns, so too could geologists remain alert for traces that hint at more than geology alone. Already the concept of the Anthropocene shows us that human civilization is writing a layer into Earth's record. By studying what makes our layer distinct, we learn what to look for elsewhere, whether on distant planets or in Earth's deeper past. But the thought also carries irony. If we did find such a technosignature buried in stone, what would it mean? Would we accept it as evidence of a prior civilization, or would we struggle to interpret it, caught between natural and artificial explanations? Even today, when faced with anomalies, science leans toward caution, preferring natural causes until no other option remains. A faint technosignature from millions of years ago might remain forever ambiguous, a mystery without closure. And yet the ambiguity does not diminish the value of the search. It is the act of asking that reshapes how we see the world. To imagine technosignatures not only among the stars but beneath our feet is to expand the horizon of possibility. It reminds us that intelligence, whether alien or terrestrial, leaves traces subtle, dispersed, and fragile, but traces nonetheless. Perhaps then, the most enduring legacy of any civilization is not its monuments, but its signals, its impact on chemistry, on geology, on energy. We are writing our own technosignature now, a mark that will linger long after we are gone. If others did so before us, their mark may still be faintly there, waiting for eyes willing to see it. When we turn our telescopes toward the stars, we carry with us a paradox. We long to find others like us, yet we expect them to look different. We imagine civilizations that may be far older, stranger, and more advanced, but we still search for signals that resemble our own. Radio waves, city lights, chemical imbalances. These are reflections of ourselves projected outward into the cosmos. In this way, the search for alien civilizations is also a mirror, showing us what we think civilization must look like. The same mirror appears when we consider forgotten civilizations on Earth. We assume that if they existed, they must have built like us, consumed resources like us, and left traces like us. But what if their path was different? What if intelligence took a form unlike ours, less material, more ecological, more ephemeral? We might never notice them, just as we might overlook alien civilizations that express themselves in ways beyond our imagination. The challenge in both searches is the same. How do you recognize intelligence when it does not resemble your own? Astronomers often debate what technosignatures to look for. Should we focus on narrow radio frequencies, hoping another species transmits deliberately? Should we look for Dyson spheres, vast structures capturing starlight? Should we search for atmospheric patterns that cannot be explained by geology alone? Each choice reflects assumptions about technology, desire, and scale, and each assumption risks blinding us to possibilities that fall outside our expectations. Archaeology faces the same trap. We look for stone monuments because they endure, but perhaps earlier civilizations never built in stone. We look for metals, but perhaps they never mined. We look for writing, but perhaps they carried knowledge in song. If so, our methods may fail, not because evidence does not exist, but because we are not prepared to see it. This is the humbling link between the search for aliens and the search for forgotten earthly civilizations. In both cases, we are limited not by the universe, but by our imagination. One lesson from astronomy is the importance of indirect evidence. We cannot see exoplanets directly most of the time, but we infer them by the dimming of stars, by tiny wobbles in motion. We do not detect alien cities, but we can imagine noticing unusual night-side glows or atmospheric chemistry. The same logic applies to Earth's deep past. We may never find a preserved city, but we might detect unusual layers of isotopes, sudden ecological shifts, or traces of materials out of place. We must train ourselves to see patterns rather than artifacts, signals rather than monuments. Another lesson is patience. The cosmos is vast and signals faint. The search may take decades, centuries, even longer. In archaeology, too, the process is slow. Layers are uncovered grain by grain, site by site, often with more questions than answers. Forgotten civilizations, if they existed, will not reveal themselves in a single spectacular find, but in a slow accumulation of anomalies that build toward a pattern. Just as with SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, silence is not proof of absence, it is only proof that we have not yet heard. There is also humility in both searches. Astronomers know that if we detect an alien civilization, it will almost certainly be older and more advanced than ours. Similarly, if a pre-human civilization existed on Earth, it would be older and perhaps organized in ways unfamiliar to us. In both cases, we must accept that we may be the latecomers, not the pioneers. Our pride tells us otherwise, but the stars and the stones remind us of time's immensity. Yet there is wonder here too. To search for others, whether across the galaxy or in Earth's deep past, is to admit that we do not stand alone. It is to open ourselves to connection across time and space. Even if we never find them, the very act of searching changes us. It reminds us that civilization is not inevitable, not singular, but part of a spectrum of possibilities. It widens our sense of what intelligence might be. Some scientists argue that the most likely alien civilizations will not be physical empires, but quiet presences, shaped by efficiency, sustainability, or even choices we cannot fathom. Perhaps they would leave little trace visible to us, their techno-signatures, faint or absent. The same may apply to forgotten earthly civilizations. Perhaps their highest achievement was not in leaving monuments, but in leaving almost nothing behind. An existence so balanced with their world that time erased them completely. To us, invisibility reads as absence, but to them, it may have been success. The parallel goes deeper still. When we look outward, we are aware that our tools may never be enough. We may search for centuries without answers, and yet we continue, because the question itself matters. The same is true when we look inward, into Earth's strata and silences. We may never prove forgotten civilizations existed, but the act of imagining them reshapes how we see ourselves. We become aware of our fragility, our impermanence, our place in a story much larger than humanity. In this way, the search for alien life and the search for forgotten earthly life converge. Both are explorations of humility. Both remind us that intelligence is not ours alone, nor is civilization guaranteed. Both expand our imagination beyond the narrow horizon of the present, and both, ultimately, are less about finding others than about understanding ourselves. Because what we fear most is not that we are alone, but that we are ordinary. And what we hope most is not simply that others exist, but that our story is part of something larger, a chorus of civilizations rising and falling across time and space. Whether in the sky or in the soil, we listen for that chorus. And in the act of listening, we remember that silence too is part of the song. In biology, there is a concept known as convergence. It describes the way evolution, working independently in different lineages, often arrives at similar solutions to similar problems. Bats and birds both evolved wings, though their ancestors did not share them. Dolphins and ichthyosaurs, mammals and reptiles separated by millions of years, came to resemble each other almost perfectly in body shape, each adapted to the demands of moving swiftly through water. Eyes have evolved not once but many times across insects, mollusks, vertebrates. Intelligence, then, may be subject to the same principle. If the pressures of survival favour problem solving, memory, cooperation, and innovation, then perhaps minds like ours are not accidents but inevitabilities. Look at the crows. In their black feathers and sharp beaks, they carry a brain capable of astonishing feats. They bend twigs into hooks, drop nuts onto roads for cars to crack, and even recognise human faces. Parrots mimic voices, but more than that, they invent new calls that spread among their flocks like cultural trends. Octopuses, separated from us by 500 million years of evolution, open jars and solve puzzles with an intelligence so alien that it feels almost otherworldly. Whales compose songs that change across generations, passing melodies like oral traditions. Intelligence is not confined to one branch of life. It emerges again and again, whenever the conditions allow. If this is true today, it may have been true before. In deep time, the world was filled with lineages we can scarcely imagine. Reptiles with feathers, mammals with tusks like swords, fish armoured like tanks, insects large enough to cover your arm. Within those lineages, the potential for intelligence may have flickered many times. Most of those sparks may have gone out, extinguished by extinction, before they could grow into civilizations. But if sparks appear so often, can we really say that civilization is unique? Or is it more accurate to think of it as a pattern, rare, fragile, but inevitable across long spans of time? This possibility reframes our question about forgotten civilizations. Instead of asking whether intelligence ever arose before us, perhaps we should ask how many times it has, and how often it reached the threshold of culture. The fossil record is silent on minds, but its diversity suggests experiments beyond counting. If even one of those experiments crossed into symbolic thought, into memory carried across generations, then civilization, however strange, would have walked the earth before us. There is also the matter of time. Humanity has existed in its present form for perhaps 300,000 years, with civilizations appearing only in the last 10,000. Dinosaurs reigned for more than 160 million years. Mammals have had more than 60 million years since their rise. The oceans have held complex life for over 500 million. Within such vast durations, the appearance of intelligence may not be rare at all. It may be expected, given enough time. What is rare is its survival. Catastrophe, climate change, asteroid impacts, and the churn of geology all conspire to erase. Intelligence may bloom often, but civilization may be ephemeral, flickering out before it can take root. Yet convergence suggests it will bloom again, if not here, then elsewhere. The universe is vast, filled with planets older than Earth, each with its own experiments in evolution. To assume that intelligence has appeared only once, on one world, in one species, is to ignore the lesson of convergence. Life finds a way to repeat patterns when they work. And intelligence works. It opens new niches, creates resilience, allows adaptation in ways beyond instinct. It is costly, yes, the brain consumes vast energy, but its benefits are immense. That is why it arises again and again, even in forms we do not always recognize. If this is so, then the Earth may be a laboratory not of a single civilization, but of many. Some may have risen quietly, without monuments, living in balance until erased. Others may have begun to reshape their world, only to be cut short by disaster. Most would leave no trace for us to find. But the fact that intelligence converges suggests that we are not unique. We are simply the ones who remain visible, for now. There is humility in this realization. We like to believe that our rise was inevitable, that evolution was aiming for us all along. But convergence tells a different story. Not inevitability of us, but inevitability of something like us. Minds that think, imagine, and shape. Civilizations that rise and fall. Perhaps our form is unique, but the pattern is not. We are not the end point of evolution, only one of its many experiments in intelligence. This also changes how we see the future. If intelligence is convergent, then even if humanity disappears, it will rise again. Perhaps not in apes, but in birds, dolphins, or species yet unborn. The Earth will continue to experiment, and sooner or later, another mind will walk, or swim, or fly that can ask the same questions we ask now. They may find traces of us, or they may not. They may wonder if they are the first just as we do. They may invent myths of golden ages, just as we have. They may imagine civilizations before them, just as we imagine now. And so the search for forgotten civilizations is also the search for ourselves, not as a unique miracle, but as part of a larger rhythm of life. Intelligence is fragile, but it is also persistent. Civilizations may be rare, but they may also be inevitable in long enough time. We stand as proof of that inevitability, one crest in a long series of waves. Behind us may lie others, hidden and erased. Ahead of us may lie others yet to come. The question is not whether we are alone in intelligence, but how often intelligence emerges and how often it leaves a mark. The answer is hidden in the silences of the fossil record and the expanses of the cosmos. But even in silence, the possibility speaks. Minds are not an exception, but part of the pattern. And in recognizing that, we see ourselves not as singular, but as connected to every other intelligence that has ever been or ever will be. The thought that civilizations might have risen and fallen long before us brings with it a strange weight. On one hand, it humbles us, reminding us that we may not be the first to walk this path. On the other, it unsettles, because it suggests that no matter how advanced, no matter how enduring, civilizations are not immortal. They flare into existence, leave a mark, sometimes faint, sometimes dramatic, and then dissolve into silence. If that is true, then what is the meaning of all our striving? What does it matter if we build, invent, and dream, only for time to erase it all? It is tempting to respond with despair. If permanence is impossible, if even pyramids and skyscrapers will crumble, if even our science and art may be forgotten, then why create at all? But there is another way to see it. Meaning does not have to come from eternity. It can come from presence. A song is not meaningless because it ends. Its value lies in the moment it is sung, in the way it moves those who hear it. A civilization too may be a kind of song, a brief performance in the vast theatre of time. Its worth lies not in how long it endures, but in how deeply it participates in the story of life while it lasts. This shift in perspective is not easy, for we are creatures of memory. We want to be remembered, to leave behind monuments and legacies that carry our names forward. Yet memory itself is fragile. Entire cultures have been forgotten within centuries. Languages once spoken by millions now survive only in fragments. If memory fades so easily, perhaps we should stop clinging to it as the only source of meaning. Perhaps meaning is in the living, in the creating, in the weaving of stories now, regardless of whether they endure. Still, the possibility of cycles forces us to confront our arrogance. We like to imagine ourselves as the pinnacle, the ones who finally conquered time. But if others have come before, then we are only another chapter. If others will come after, then our permanence is an illusion. This realization is not an insult, but a liberation. It frees us from the burden of believing we must last forever. It reminds us that our place is not at the top of a ladder, but on a branch of a vast, branching tree. We are not alone in the experiment of civilization. We are part of its rhythm. Some philosophers argue that impermanence is the very condition of beauty. A flower is precious because it wilts. A sunset is meaningful because it fades. If civilizations too are impermanent, then perhaps their beauty lies in their transience. To exist at all, even briefly, is a miracle in the vast silence of time. To think, to create, to love, to wonder, these are achievements regardless of whether the earth remembers them. If we accept this, then the question is not, will we last, but what will we create while we are here? The possibility of forgotten civilizations also deepens our sense of kinship. If others once dreamed before us, then we are not alone in our striving. Even if their names are lost, even if their works are erased, their existence, if it was real, connects us across the gulf of time. We share the same condition, fragile, impermanent, yet luminous for a moment. Their silence is not emptiness, but resonance. It reminds us that the act of civilization itself, the act of building meaning in a world that forgets, is a universal gesture. We are part of a chorus that rises and falls across ages, each voice distinct, but all singing the same theme. This awareness also shapes how we view legacy. Perhaps we should think less about what we leave in stone and more about what we leave in patterns. Kindness, creativity, stewardship of the earth. These are legacies less vulnerable to erosion. If we are remembered at all, it may be through the ecological patterns we create, the cultural rhythms we seed, the knowledge we spread. And if we are not remembered, then those patterns still matter in the lives they touch, in the present moment of existence. To see civilization as cyclical is to accept that erasure is natural, but erasure is not the same as futility. The universe itself is impermanent. Stars burn out, galaxies collide, black holes evaporate. Yet within that impermanence, life finds ways to create. We too are part of that process, contributing our verse to a cosmic poem without end. Our place is not to last forever, but to participate fully while we can. There is, however, a cautionary side to this reflection. If cycles are natural, we may be tempted to resign ourselves, to say collapse is inevitable. But inevitability is not an excuse. To know collapse may come is to be reminded of responsibility, to make our time meaningful, to care for what we can, to reduce harm. If we must vanish, let it not be through neglect or arrogance. Let us live in such a way that if some future intelligence uncovers even a faint trace of us, they see not only destruction but creativity, not only scars but signs of care. In the end, the question of forgotten civilizations does not diminish us. It enlarges us. It places our story in a grander frame, one that stretches across eons. It shows us that meaning does not depend on being first or last, but on being part of the rhythm. If civilizations rise and vanish in cycles, then our role is to embrace our cycle with awareness, humility, and wonder. To live as though the brief light of our existence matters, not because it will last forever, but because it shines now against the darkness of time. The idea of forgotten civilizations touches something deep within us. It is not only a scientific question, but a psychological one, a reflection of how we think about time, identity, and possibility. Why do stories of lost worlds captivate us so strongly? Why do we return, again and again, to myths of Atlantis, to tales of sunken empires, to speculation about vanished peoples? The fascination is more than curiosity. It is a mirror held up to our own anxieties and aspirations. Part of the appeal lies in mystery itself. Humans are narrative creatures, drawn to gaps and silences. When history presents a blank space, we instinctively fill it with stories. The absence of knowledge becomes an invitation to imagine. Lost civilizations are the ultimate blank space, entire worlds that might have been erased without a trace. To think of them is to step into a mystery larger than any detective story, one that stretches across millions of years and involves not just individuals, but entire species. But fascination with forgotten worlds is also a way of confronting our fear of mortality. Just as individuals fear being forgotten, civilizations too carry the anxiety of impermanence. We build monuments and archives to resist oblivion, but deep down we know that time will erase them. By imagining civilizations before us that have already vanished, we are rehearsing our own fate. The stories of Atlantis or Lemuria are not only about others, they are about us, about the knowledge that we too might disappear. To dwell on lost civilizations is to process the inevitability of loss, to wrap it in narrative so it feels less stark. At the same time, there is comfort in the idea. If others have risen and fallen, then our fall is not unique. We are part of a cycle, not an isolated tragedy. The thought that civilizations may recur, that intelligence blooms more than once, reassures us that meaning is not extinguished when we vanish. The Earth or the universe will continue the experiment. Our disappearance would not end the story, it would simply turn the page. This duality, fear of loss, comfort in continuity, explains why the theme of forgotten civilizations carries both dread and allure. There is also a psychological appeal in the promise of hidden knowledge. A lost world suggests secrets waiting to be uncovered, wisdom preserved in fragments. Atlantis is imagined not only as a tragedy, but as a place of advanced understanding, technologies or philosophies greater than our own. To believe in such worlds is to believe that somewhere, hidden in the cracks of time, there exists knowledge that could transform us. This reveals our dissatisfaction with the present, our hope that salvation lies not in what we know, but in what we have forgotten. The fantasy of rediscovery is as powerful as the fantasy of discovery. Even skepticism plays a role in the fascination. To dismiss lost civilizations outright is to risk appearing too certain in a world where certainty is fragile. To entertain them, even cautiously, is to acknowledge wonder. Psychologically, we crave both, certainty and wonder. The balance between them defines much of human thought. The idea of forgotten civilizations offers a stage on which both impulses can play, the rational urge to investigate and the imaginative urge to dream. Our fascination also reveals something about our relationship to time. We are creatures of short lives, measuring years and decades, yet we live on a planet that counts in millions. The mismatch is unsettling. To bridge it, we tell stories that make deep time more personal. Lost civilizations are one such bridge. They compress vast spans into human terms, cities, cultures, stories we can imagine. They allow us to step into epochs otherwise too vast to grasp. By populating deep time with civilizations, we make it less alien, less overwhelming. There is, too, a shadow to this fascination. Some lost civilization myths have been used to diminish real peoples, to claim that indigenous cultures could not have built their own monuments, that they inherited them from vanished others. These misuses remind us that the psychology of lost worlds can be double-edged, capable of inspiring wonder, but also of fueling prejudice. To explore the possibility responsibly means holding both truths, to allow imagination, but not at the expense of respect for known history. Still, the core fascination persists because it speaks to something universal. To wonder about forgotten civilizations is to ask, what else is possible? What other forms of life, of thought, of culture might exist, either in the past or the future? It is a refusal to accept that what we see now is all there is. That refusal is at the heart of human creativity. It drives us to paint, to write, to build, to explore the stars. The lost world is not just a relic of the past, it is a symbol of possibility itself. Perhaps, then, the psychological pull of this idea is less about what has been lost than about what could be found. The notion that entire civilizations may have existed and vanished reminds us that the unknown is still vast. It reassures us that our story is not closed, that there are still mysteries waiting. In a time when so much seems mapped and explained, this reminder is precious. It keeps alive the spark of wonder that first made us explorers. In the end, our fascination with forgotten civilizations says as much about us as about the past. It reveals our fear of erasure, our hunger for meaning, our hope for discovery, and our need for wonder. Whether or not such civilizations ever existed, the idea of them reflects who we are. Beings caught between time and eternity, building stories to make sense of the silence. To imagine them is to imagine ourselves, and to accept that our deepest questions may never have final answers. As we move through the layers of this question, geology, archaeology, myth, psychology, we find that the idea of forgotten civilizations is not confined to one domain. It is a crossroads where science and story meet, where evidence and imagination weave together. This convergence is not a flaw, it is a reflection of the complexity of the subject. For what we are really searching for is not only traces of others, but a deeper understanding of ourselves. Science provides the methods. It teaches us to read the earth, to analyze isotopes in rock, to study the patterns of extinctions and recoveries, to uncover ruins buried by time. It demands evidence, rigor, and humility. Through science, we learn that civilizations, even mighty ones, are fragile, that ecosystems bear the marks of culture long after structures are gone, that anomalies in geology may hint at stories we cannot fully reconstruct. Science grounds our speculation, reminding us that the earth has rules, and those rules leave records. Myth provides the memory. It carries stories across millennia, refracted through imagination, but still resonant with echoes. Floods, golden ages, vanished teachers, their persistence across cultures suggests not literal history, but deep awareness of cycles and fragility. Myth preserves truths not as data, but as symbols, accessible not to measurement, but to meaning. To dismiss myth is to dismiss part of the human mind. To integrate it is to recognize that memory comes in many forms. Psychology explains our fascination. It shows us that our attraction to lost civilizations is tied to our fears of mortality and our hunger for continuity. We are drawn to stories of vanished worlds because they reflect our own anxieties about impermanence, our yearning for hidden wisdom, our need to make time comprehensible. To explore forgotten civilizations is to explore the human psyche itself, its shadows, and its hopes. Imagination ties these threads together. It allows us to bridge the silences that evidence cannot fill, to envision possibilities that science has not yet proved. Imagination does not replace evidence, but it gives us the courage to look for it. Without imagination, Göbekli Tepe might still lie buried. Without imagination, astronomy would never have considered other planets as homes for life. To imagine forgotten civilizations is to extend the scope of our inquiry beyond the known, to test the boundaries of what might be. Together, these strands form a tapestry of inquiry. None alone is sufficient. Science without imagination is blind. Myth without evidence is untethered. Psychology without history is solipsistic. But woven together, they create a way of seeing that is richer than any single thread. The search for forgotten civilizations, then, is not simply about the past. It is about how we weave knowledge and story into meaning. This synthesis also reveals the limits of certainty. We may never find definitive proof of civilizations before us. The earth is too restless, time too vast, evidence too fragile. But the absence of proof does not mean the absence of value. To hold the possibility in mind is to stretch our imagination, to question our assumptions, to recognize the contingency of our own place in history. Even if no other civilization ever existed, the act of asking the question reshapes how we see ourselves. It also reshapes how we view our responsibilities. If we are the only civilization the Earth has produced, then our burden is immense to care for a rare gift. If we are one of many, then our burden is different, to honour the cycle, to live with humility, to contribute our verse knowing others have come before and others will follow. In both cases, the question of forgotten civilizations turns into a mirror, showing us not what was, but what is required of us now. And perhaps that is the deeper truth of this inquiry. Whether civilizations before us existed or not, the earth will one day erase us too. What endures is not certainty, but perspective. To see ourselves as fragile, as impermanent, as participants in cycles beyond our control is to gain humility. To imagine others who dreamed before us is to feel kinship across time. To wonder at their silence is to recognize the gift of our own voice, here and now. This synthesis does not close the question, it opens it wider. It invites us to live as though the possibility is real, not because we can prove it, but because it enriches our understanding. The search for forgotten civilizations becomes less about discovery than about orientation. How we place ourselves in the vastness of time, how we balance pride with humility, how we honour both evidence and wonder. And in this balance lies a quiet wisdom. The earth may never tell us definitively whether others walked this path before us, but by asking, by imagining, by searching, we affirm something profound, that we are not content with the surface of things. We reach for depth, for connection, for meaning beyond the immediate. That reaching is itself a kind of civilization, a culture of curiosity, built not of stone, but of questions. We began with a question. What if Earth's first civilization was not human? It is a question that refuses easy answers, because the Earth is old and time is vast, and certainty dissolves when measured against millions of years. Along the way, we have walked through geology and archaeology, myth and psychology, science and imagination. Each path has shown us not only what we know, but how much we do not. And in that silence, possibility remains. The science reminds us that civilizations leave traces, but fragile ones. Stone crumbles, metal rusts, wood burns, memory fades. Even our greatest cities, left untended, would vanish in a heartbeat of geological time. Yet chemistry persists. Carbon spikes in the air, isotopes in the soil, microplastics in the seas. These are the whispers that might outlast us. If others once lived here, perhaps their whispers too lie buried, waiting in layers we have not yet read, The myths remind us that memory takes many forms. Stories of floods, golden ages, vanished teachers may not be literal records, but they are echoes of awareness. Awareness that worlds end, that cycles repeat, that knowledge is fragile. Whether or not they preserve true histories, they reflect a deep intuition that civilizations rise and fall, and that ours is not immune. The psychology reveals why we are drawn to the question. Forgotten civilizations mirror our own fear of erasure and our hope for continuity. They let us confront impermanence through story, transforming dread into mystery. They promise hidden knowledge, the possibility that the world still holds secrets that we are not yet finished learning. And imagination, finally, is what binds it all. Without imagination, we would never think to ask if others came before us. Without imagination, we would not build telescopes to search the stars or shovels to unearth the past. To wonder about forgotten civilizations is not to deny science, it is to live fully within its spirit, which thrives on questions, not certainties. So what do we conclude? Perhaps nothing definitive. Perhaps that is the point. The earth has erased so much that we may never know if others once dreamed beneath these skies. But in wondering, we are reminded of truths that matter now. That civilizations are fragile. That impermanence is the rule, not the exception. That our meaning lies not in how long we endure, but in how deeply we live while we can. There is a strange comfort in this. If we are the first, then we are precious, a rare experiment in the universe's long history. If we are not the first, then we are connected, part of a chorus of civilizations across time, each singing for a moment before falling silent. In either case, our task is the same: to live with humility, to care for the earth, to create beauty and meaning in our brief span. Perhaps one day, far in the future, another intelligence will find a trace of us, a chemical anomaly, a fossilized shard, a faint line in stone, and wonder if we too were once here. Perhaps they will invent myths about us, just as we invent myths about those we imagine before us. Perhaps they will ask the same question we ask now. Were we alone? Were we the first? And maybe the answer will be the same silence we hear today. But silence does not mean emptiness. Silence is a canvas on which we paint our imagination, a space where meaning emerges not from certainty, but from wonder. Forgotten civilizations may remain forever hypothetical, forever unproven, yet by entertaining the idea, we expand the boundaries of what we consider possible. We become less arrogant, more curious, more alive to the mystery of existence. In the end, the question is not about them, but about us. What will we leave behind? What will our silence say? Will we be remembered as a scar on the earth, or as a fleeting light that, however brief, shone with creativity and care? The possibility of forgotten civilizations is less an answer than a mirror, asking us to think not only of the past, but of the future we are writing now. So perhaps the true gift of this journey is perspective. To know that even if we vanish, the universe continues. To know that even if we are not first, our story matters. To know that civilizations, like stars, flare and fade, but in their brief light they illuminate the darkness. We are such a light, and that is enough.